Thank you for coming. Welcome. This is really what I've been looking forward to all week. This is a great session. It's called Safe Harbour. It's a roundtable discussion on women's leadership in and beyond refugee communities. And this is vital because if anything reflects today's realities of gender inequality, it is the plight of women who are forcibly displaced and who become refugees, women and girls. Forced displacement really does multiply a woman's vulnerability when she's separated from her home, from her livelihood, from her community, and definitely from her family. And in these situations, women lose everything. They lose their incomes, they lose their livelihoods of any sort, they lose their documentation, their official papers. They really are left with nothing. They can't access basic services. They can't meet their own needs. So in this situation, think of any of you. You end up in a situation of complete survival mode, which leaves these women open to sexual exploitation, sexual violence, child marriage, human traffickers, prostitution, and even sometimes having to return to these very dangerous areas. Because again, part of that misconception about women who are internally displaced is the fact that they don't just have a crisis and move. They have to keep moving. They sometimes move 2, 3, 4, 5 times before they even get to a border in these atrocious conditions. So part of today's discussion, the most important word here, because it's connected to everything else, is empowerment. This is about really understanding how one helps, how one protects, to put them into a very different space. About a quarter of the world's 7 billion plus population live in environments that are exposed to violence, but in which women have no role as leaders or indeed as peace builders, as peacekeepers. And sexual violence, as probably a lot of you heard in today's sessions, is always an expression of unequal power relations. And a lack of women's leadership feeds that perpetual women as victims. They're hopeless, they're helpless, they're born this way, and it really does actually sometimes even distort risk assessment of women in these situations, and sometimes even aid assistance unwillingly and unknowingly can perpetuate some of the abuse through further violence and extremism. So what has to come through loud and clear today, and we'll hear this on the panel, is that women are superhuman strong when they're given the help and the protection and the tools. And importantly, they are transformative to building resilience into communities. If there's more conflict, if there's more climate change effects, where you get that resilience is through empowering those women. They're doing this through peaceful means. They're not creating more war, more conflict. So half the increase of child survival happens because mothers can read and write and have access to healthcare. So no investment is ever wasted on women who are internally displaced and become refugees. None. But we have to understand how and how to help them, how to reach them in the best ways possible. And sometimes it's through innovative partnering, but it's about community building through women. So we have today, to discuss these issues and more, we have a pretty empowered quartet of women on the panel today. I'll just do a quick introduction to everybody and we'll get going. On my left, here, immediate left, I have Kimberly Geyer, who is a banker philanthropist and founder of Global Women Leaders Strategic Philanthropy. This is a sort of cornerstone alliance partner to the International Committee of the Red Cross, and that advises on innovative finance and strategic partnering. She's also advisor to the World Bank on their famine action plan. Princess Sarah Zaid of Jordan, next to Kimberly, is an advocate for maternal and newborn health in humanitarian and fragile settings. She's also a member of the UNHCR's advisory board on gender, internal displacement, forced displacement, and protection. And we have Rosie Kelly, who works for RB. RB is a consumer health business investing in research and development for entrepreneurs and innovative health products. And I'm sure many of you will be familiar with some of their products, which includes Durex and Nurofen. And last but most definitely not least is, and I'm just going to say it outright because you should all know this, this is the heroine of the day. If you'd like to know one up close and personal, this is it. Or this is her, Dorsa Nasemi Salman, and she is head of the subdelegation of the ICRC, managing their programs and their objectives in South Sudan. Now, I'm going to go off piste again and just say I cannot stress enough the degree, the depth, the width of her commitment and of her bravery and of her conviction to be in what is arguably one of the most dangerous places in the world today, and she is a woman doing the job. Last year alone, 38 workers were killed. I'm being dramatic here, but it is dramatic. Anyway, so she is our heroine. So let's get started. I'm really excited about this. I hope this changes perception because women are really extraordinary in these situations. So Sarah, I wanted to turn to you and just head off here on a quote by Peter Maurer, who is the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, who recently wrote, "Why, despite the best of intentions, are we failing to substantially reduce the terrible harm and suffering caused by sexual violence in conflict?" So I'm just going to put it out there. What kinds of gender-responsive solutions are needed to assist, protect, and empower internally displaced and refugee women and girls?
Thank you very much, and it really is it's a great honour to be here and to be part of this panel of extraordinary women. Look at me, I'm just one big scribbledy note after another, so if I get caught up in the middle of this, I apologise in advance. First of all, why do women matter? Why is this work so critical? Because if you put a woman at the heart of everything that we do, you impact. If she is healthy, if her rights are respected, then you end up having these extraordinary ripple effect consequences, positive consequences on her family, on her community, on her children, and ultimately sustainable development, peace and security rest in the hands of women and girls. In the first 1,000 days of life, which is from conception to age 2 of a child, if the mother is healthy, those first 2 years of a child's life, if those are healthy, if the mother is well nourished, if she is able to care for her child, then you have the opportunity to be fully cognitively and physically developed. If you miss those first critical 1,000 days, the cognitive and physical impairments that result you can never get them back. And so before we even put a child in front of a teacher, before we create employment opportunities and make sure that they live in secure environments, if we've missed that critical time, which comes again initially from a woman's health, then we are impeding layer after layer. If you think about, my father's a geologist, so everything sort of goes in rock strata, layer after layer. Every 1,000 days you think about another, however many children it must be across the world that are emotionally, physically and cognitively impaired. So a couple of reasons why women and girls are so important. It's also that they're the first responders. When disaster happens, they are the first responders. They're also the first defenders of their children and their families. Women are also disproportionately vulnerable, as you heard, to some of the things that are happening around the world, whether it be child marriage, that in conflict settings, girls are 2.5 times more likely to drop out of school. You see, these are all my love. I've been on the road for 2 weeks talking about this, which is also why I'm slightly confused. Burden of disease will always happen in humanitarian and fragile settings. If you look at the cholera outbreak that we've had recently in Yemen, the largest in the world, if you look at Ebola, women and girls are 60% more vulnerable to Ebola than men and boys are because of the nature of what a woman does, the caring, the looking after of family and so on. Malnutrition, 75% of the world's chronically malnourished children live in conflict-affected settings, and on and on and on. So the need is the greatest in humanitarian settings. And there are 32 million women and girls of reproductive age at the moment in the world that need our attention. So I would say that women and girls are superheroes, but it's up to us to make a superhuman effort to support everything that they do and that they contribute. And so this is where the gender responsive programming comes in, because the current architecture of the humanitarian system that exists is not designed putting either the woman at the center. It is not designed to support the needs, vulnerabilities, and specific issues that women care about at the forefront. In humanitarian settings, reproductive health is not prioritized, and it is not considered life-saving. Just think about that for a moment. If there's a sudden shock, you can understand. That's not going to last for very long. Earlier this week, I was in Rwanda. I was there with UNHCR. I went to a refugee camp of Congolese, and they had been in this camp for 21 years. Okay, this is not an emergency. This can be your entire reproductive cycle. Being born, going through adolescence and puberty, and giving birth yourself. And sitting with teenage mothers, the babies that they had, that was the third generation living in this camp. Third generation of women and girls whose reproductive needs and all of these areas where they are specifically vulnerable to security, to safety, to hygiene, school dropouts. It's the women and girls that go and seek wood and these sorts of things. Has not been prioritized. It hasn't even been considered along this continuum of care. So the first thing is to prioritize women and girls. You put them in the center, and you bring the system around in a multi-sectoral way, understanding all of your needs. Long-term funding and making sure that reproductive health is considered critical, prioritized, and life-saving. That does it.
Is that it? Great.
Yeah,
and actually, no, we're very happy with that. We can also take questions later as well. But I think we've got it. I mean, I think for a lot of us, it's just QED, Natch, but it is extraordinary that I think Sarah's point about the humanitarian sector not being designed to strategize and focus on women's priorities in this situation, in these fragile settings. I wanted to turn to Rosie now, because RB has committed itself to helping meet the vital needs of the displaced and refugee women. You've done it in a very focused way, a very narrow way, which you want impact, you want to find impact outcomes to the displaced. And so you've partnered with an NGO. So if you want to take us from there.
So I'd like to start by asking you to think about a couple of questions. If you've got a question about your health, who do you ask? I'm guessing your mum, a friend, maybe a doctor. But if that question is about your sexual health, does the answer change? And what if you've never had any sexual health education? How can you ask for help? Now imagine you're one of the 65 million refugees or forcibly displaced people worldwide. You're living in temporary accommodation, away from those you normally turn to for advice about health, and more importantly, sexual health, which is a topic which is equally guided by misinformation and as such as hearsay, pornography, as it is genuine scientific fact. So where can you turn to for information? There are over 30 million refugee women and girls who need sexual and reproductive health information, and less than 4% of NGOs and INGOs prioritise this in their programming. This is a problem because these women are 4 times more likely to experience sexual violence than their non-refugee counterparts. Durex, where I work, is on a mission to drive social change by educating communities on how to live healthier lives. We realised that the refugee community could not easily access information on sexual health and rights, and in fact, there seemed to be a gaping unmet need. But to find the best solution, we realised that we first had to truly understand the problem. This time last year, our project team, which consists of 5 women and 1 very brave man, met an NGO called the Unmentionables. Their sole purpose is to provide refugees and displaced people with access to sexual and reproductive health products, services, and education. We saw the massive synergies between their mission and Durex's, and so we formed a partnership. We have created a solution to the crisis that is the lack of sexual and reproductive health information within the refugee community, and it's called Unfiltered. Unfiltered is an app and website which allows anyone, anywhere, to access UN-aligned sexual and reproductive health information. It is the first tech solution for sexual health which specifically targets the needs of refugees. This past year has been an enormous learning journey, and I believe that our biggest contribution to this cause has been our ability to listen. And in doing that, we've learned 3 key things, which I'm going to touch upon now. So the first is behaviour change. We realised that to ensure that everyone, so those in the refugee community and those who work with them, need to be able to talk openly about sex. And for many, this is uncomfortable, and that includes those outside the refugee community. But if we ignore or skirt around the problems faced by refugee women, and these are real problems like sexual violence, we only risk providing superficial solutions. For instance, women and girls told us that they felt unsafe in refugee camps at night. And when we asked why, they initially couldn't really articulate it. And so we asked again, and again, and again. And it transpired that they were afraid of sexual harassment or assault. And you can imagine what some of the solutions are for these. It's things like increased lighting and more guards at night. And whilst these are definitely part of the answer, they don't actually address the real underlying issue, which is the issue of threatening behaviour. And so how does this relate to talking about sex? I believe that these women and girls struggle to articulate their fear because they were not equipped with the tools to understand their sexual rights. We must make it okay to ask questions and seek out information. And whilst it is difficult, I believe that we have one key thing on our side. And this is that refugees are in new environments, defining new behaviour patterns. And we have a unique opportunity to reach people who may be more receptive to a different perspective than they otherwise would be. Our second learning was about empowerment, which is something you touched upon earlier.
Keep the mic close to you. Yeah.
We learned that empowerment isn't about refugees in terms of teaching them. It's about providing them with the tools to first reevaluate their attitudes to sexual health and then that of their communities. This works incredibly successfully with the Unmentionables Train the Trainer model. They train male and female refugees to teach the unfiltered curriculum in their own communities. The impact the training and consequent employment has on their self-esteem is incredible. If we want to invoke a seismic shift in the way that refugees interact with sexual health, we need to empower them to get involved with creating their own solution. And so as a corporation, I believe that it's our job to listen to them, provide them the tools that they need, and then step back and let them get on with it themselves. Our final insight was about the importance of technology. Whilst the classroom model is fantastic, it still is, for a myriad of reasons, not accessible to everyone. And we learned that 89% of women want to learn about their sexual health and rights, but only 8% feel comfortable attending in-person classes. And when we asked why, we discovered so many barriers, and they range from social to cultural to psychological to just logistical. But we also realised that the majority of refugees have a phone with some data capacity. And this was our lightning bolt moment and the catalyst for creating Unfiltered. We realised that we had to create an online solution for refugees in unfamiliar environments without their normal support networks. They needed a safe space, free of judgment, where they could access factual, impartial, and unbiased information about their sexual health and rights. So to conclude, why is sexual health important? Refugee women and girls make daily decisions which affect their sexual health and rights. These decisions may be made without their familiar support network and potentially based on misinformation. But these decisions will have lifelong consequences. To best equip women and men for success, we need to ensure that they can easily access information to help them make informed and consenting decisions about their bodies. And so is unfiltered the answer for everything? No, but it is a step in the right direction. Our singular aim is to get unfiltered as a mandated programme in every UN-supported refugee camp, because we want every single refugee to be able to access sexual education. And I believe that we are on the way to having a solution for this.
Thanks very much. Rosie, I just wanted to ask you, because I saw the app, and what I think was quite important about it is the whole premise is that what you don't want to talk about in public or in a classroom, you access through that app. But that app is also designed for men, which I think is very important in that sense, because even if men do it behind closed doors, they're too embarrassed to say that they don't know things. They do have very good information there about what behavior is, what their sexual behavior is, and what is normal and what is not normal, etc. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so we believe that empowering men is equally important in empowering women, and that the only way to lift women up is to lift men up with them. Because with the refugees who I've met in Elionas refugee camp in Athens, a big part of the reason they wouldn't attend the classes was because they were worried about male opinion of them. So they were worried about their brothers or their fathers seeing them going to attend, the sex class. And so if we can make men believe that this is actually really important for women, and they would want their sisters and their mothers and their wives to understand their own rights, I think that's really key to the solution.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Kimberly now, because Kimberly, you've been in refugee camps in Lebanon and Kenya. Do you want to use my mic in a minute? That seems an awfully huge mic. I'll pass you mine. Tell me, what are the examples that you've seen of women's leadership within and beyond displaced communities that have helped women improve their plight?
Thank you. I think I'll start with the refugee camps, but one of the things that I really wanted to focus on today, and one of the reasons I am particularly glad that Dorsa is here today, is that there is so much that is happening beyond what we can see in refugee camps, which are absolutely importantly in the headlines and an enormous need. But there is a very hidden need in displaced communities, in places that you can't see in your daily headlines. And one of the things that I try to do through the group of women that I'm working with is to shine a light on these areas where really no one is looking and often the money isn't flowing. And so the thing I would say that I've seen in refugee communities is that there are great services going on, that there are great aid workers, humanitarian workers, doing amazing things to bring education, to bring sexual health, but they're doing it with very limited resources, frankly. And that comes down to us. That comes down to us as individuals, that comes down to us as corporates, and that comes down to the governments that we work with. So we can do more for these women through the tools that humanitarians, frankly, know how to do with more resources. Now, that may sound like a blatant cry for resources. It is. That's what these women need. They need us to focus on them. They need us to put enough money in the pot so that it goes beyond survival, it goes beyond food, shelter, water, and that they have, as Sarah said, the nutrition in their bodies and the nutrition in their children's bodies, which includes sexual education. So I'm going to bang the table a little bit and say we actually all need to do more. Dorsa is a good friend of mine, actually, and I'm thrilled that she's here today, and she's actually given up some of her recreational time with her family in the audience today to come and share with you what she does, because it's vitally important and we're not doing enough about it. There's enough money in the world to do this. There's enough heart in the world to do this, and I think there's actually just not enough talking about it, which is why I'm thrilled that this panel is here today. So companies like RB, individuals like myself, the taxes that you pay that go for these things, we need to all make sure that we're shifting enough into these coffers on a reasonable basis of term funding that will allow us to put these programs in place. So when you have short-term budgets, when you have limited budgets, you can only do limited things, and it's a whole generation of women and girls that are missing out. So I've seen amazing women and girls in camps. I'm dying to go to the field and see Dorsa, outside of her beautiful dress, I've seen her without her lipstick and doing incredible work and putting herself in harm's way, frankly, and worrying night after night about her own team that are out there, because, if she can do it, I can do it. And so I do this pro bono to help women like her. and to actually make a difference in their lives. And the girls that I've met that are in education, including sexual education and refugee camps, I want to tell you they are resilient, they are smart, they want to be a journalist, they want to be a doctor. Actually they said they didn't want to do what I do. They didn't want to be bankers, but that's fine. They're ready, and we're not investing enough in them. And I actually don't want to take up too much more time because I actually want to give the time to Dorsa because she's the one doing the work, and that's the reason why we choose to align with International Committee of the Red Cross and other humanitarian organizations to share with you what you can do. And please see me after if you'd like to know how. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kimberly. We do have the real thing. We have Dorsa, who's had real boots and probably sandals on the ground experience in the last couple of years. This is a really difficult place to get into for most aid agencies. This is quite unique where she is. And it is unique that it's a woman who is heading the subdelegation there and who is managing people every day. So you're in this unique position. This is a country that has been tragically, basically defined by civil war in its very brief history. It has an economic famine. It has millions of people displaced, people killed. Talk to us, first of all, about you being in this situation. So how is your position as a woman leader viewed in such a situation, such a fragile situation that has a patriarchal tradition? Does your gender actually help or infringe upon your efforts to get things done? And does it help or hinder that you are a woman who is not South Sudanese?
Well, first of all, I just want to say a big thank you. I'm very humbled with all the comments and the praises. I certainly do not deserve all of them, and the honor of being part of this panel and being invited to the forum. So thank you very much. To start with the issue, the context that it's South Sudan, and it is a protracted war that has been prolonged, and it does create certainly a fragile state where nothing exists. The social services don't exist. There are no roads. Everything has to be. There's, I think, in the entire South Sudan, 300 kilometers of asphalted or paved roads. And this makes the delivery of humanitarian aid, the access to social services, one of the most critical and difficult issues and challenges that humanitarians like me and other organizations that work on the ground, boots on the ground, face every day. As a woman, to be honest with you, I never have put my gender as a question. I think when you work as a ICRC or International Committee of the Red Cross delegate, you are mandated and tasked to carry out your activities and make sure that you provide the assistance to those who are most vulnerable and affected by armed conflict, be it in international, non-international, or other situations, international or non-international armed conflict, or what we call other situations of violence. I certainly have been in context where I've worked in Afghanistan, I've worked in Nigeria, and now in South Sudan, where of course it's all of them are patriarchal society, but women, I think we have a different approach, more of a softer diplomacy towards meeting our interlocutors or the people that we deal with. Yes, there are many. Most of my interlocutors are men, and they are the ones who hold the power. But I guess my audience is the beneficiaries on the ground, is the women, is the children, and the men themselves, because don't forget that they're also the victims of a protracted war, and the consequences of a conflict such as South Sudan creates post-traumatic stress on youth, and these youth become young men, and these young men becomes arm bearers, or they become the ones who perpetuate the violence in the field. So for me, male or female, doesn't matter. If you were there in the situation, you probably do require assistance. Yes, vulnerabilities are much stronger when you are a female, or you're a girl child, or you are a child in general. You're more vulnerable to risks and of course shocks. But my gender has never been an issue for me.
And in a patriarchal country such as South Sudan, do women do they play a role at some level of leadership? that you come across when you're having to deliver things and manage programs and get to objectives? Do you see women with some sense of leadership there, or having a leverage of some sort, or are they very much second-class citizens and you have to sort of go through men?
I think we have to be very careful about trying to categorize or box women who are in such context or in these countries, because in a tribal context that is South Sudan, women do have a position and a station within the tribe. They are the carers. If you consider, if a clash happens between one tribe and another tribe, the wounded are taken to the women. If one woman who lives in a mud hut maybe 10 feet away sees armed men approaching, she actually makes a sound that alerts the rest of the community that there is danger coming. They are the carers, they are the protectors, they are the one who raise the men and they raise the young men. And this is very much ingrained in their culture. So if you want to, and it doesn't go just to South Sudan, it goes to any I'm not a mother, but I have brothers. I have a nephew. And if you, I'm sorry to bring it down to this, but if you don't teach them to put the toilet seat down, they will not put the toilet seat down. It's up to the mother to teach and to remind. But it is a behavior that is learned and if you have been caught in year after year, generation after generation of conflict, of violence, of seeing your children die or seeing your husband die, and then you have to move from one location to another location, it is the only thing you would know. And and your coping mechanisms are built around that. I wanted to also touch upon something that I think it's very important to mention about the concept of displaced women, is that when you are a refugee, you are by far a lot more settled than you are internally displaced. Because when you're internally displaced, you have a status, you're in your own country. And you're just moving from one side to another because the conflict happens, and if it's a protracted, fragile state, violence can happen at any moment because there is no social structure to protect you. There is no police, there is no army. And if the army is there, if the police is there, probably are the perpetuators of violence themselves. And and also with perforations of arms, the bullet. I know most of the times the first thing that I go into a conflict zone, I find out the price of an AK-47 and the price of a bullet, because it shows whether a person can actually, a young man, does it have the economic power to actually purchase a bullet? And what is this bullet? Because before, if you were on the ground, you wanted to steal a cattle or you wanted to carry a weapon, you might have used arrows or swords or whatever, or sticks. But now you have these young men have access to AK-47. So it's easier to put a gun to a woman's head and then sexually abuse her. It is easier to put a gun to the head of a woman and say, that bag of rice belongs to me and I will take it. And she would not be able to do anything to stop.
And how do you reach those that don't have access? How do you know about them? How can you get there? What happens to women who are in these situations? This is one even beyond that. There's the internally displaced that are moving around, but some actually you can't even get to.
Well, as a humanitarian, I like to hope and I like to think that when crises do happen, usually because of our mandate and because of the trust that the community has, and because we have been, let's say, in a country like South Sudan, in actually some of our top 10 operations, we've been in the country for decades. The authorities know us, and they probably have, we have reunified them during the beginning of the conflict, or they have benefited at some stage from one of our programs that we implement on the ground. Can be restoring family links, to food distributions, to primary health care, to weapon wounded surgery. If you got a bullet, I can bet in South Sudan that before the war between Sudan and South Sudan, we had Lokochokio, where if you were weapon wounded, you will be flown to the hospital that was owned and run by CRC, and you will be treated. Now, we have surgical teams that are spread across the country, and we will fly you and we will treat you. So they know us, and they are the ones who contact us.
Yeah, they trust you.
And it's not just even about the trust. I think this is why the impact of humanitarians who are in protracted countries are so unique, is that your very presence could provide protection. Now, when it comes to sexual violence, and I wanted to touch upon what your organization is doing, is that for us, transversality in all sexual violence or approach to sexual violence or protection for women, it's a transversal approach. We don't just say it is health. It is not just we have to make sure that they know about their reproductive health. A woman who lives far, far away from any primary healthcare center or a unit or a hospital would not know what their sexual reproductive system or process is. They are probably, they have gone probably through a genital mutilation, they probably have internal organs removed, they probably have experienced sexual violence from a very young age, or have seen it happen to their mothers or to their sisters or to their aunts. However, I refuse to accept that these women are victims. They are very much empowered. They can move mountains if they want to with their kids on their back. I have been in distributions, and I can speak with authority on this, that we carry out large food distributions across South Sudan, by air, by truck, by any means possible, by river, by any means possible. And the majority of the people who come to collect food distributions are women, female-headed households. They could be widows, they could be separated from their husband, they do not know where their husband is, so they put their husbands in a missing category, which is one of the most difficult situation a family can go through, because they don't know if the husband is alive, if the brother is alive or dead, and that is the most difficult thing to deal with. And women they all have their kids with them. They have lots of kids, because you need to have more children in order to continue the line. Otherwise, because these are the children who will take care of you afterwards. So the sexual reproductive health or family planning is non-existent, because they don't know that they don't have to have 12 children and then have 12 mouths to feed. Because if you move, and if you're in a camp in Kakuma or in Lebanon or somewhere in Nairobi or in Ethiopia, you have access, because somebody from Oxfam or somebody from UNHCR or UNICEF is coming and knocking on your tent and saying, hey, this is available. But if you're a woman going from place to place in South Sudan, you will not be able to have access to this, because it's fleeting. You will not have access to 3G, 4G, or any Gs, because there is no tower, there is no electricity. It is dark, it is pitch black.
So how do you start to change that humanitarian context so that it is open for development, such as education and healthcare, the way that Rosie was talking about? How does it move from humanitarian into development?
It is a very interesting topic, because I think when you look at an institution like ICRC, we are emergency responders. There's an incident, we're there, we're the first to respond, we know very well how to respond to it, and we're trusted to be able to carry it. When it comes to development, it is a long-term approach. It is something that you have to have a plan A to Z to be able to, and be flexible enough to maneuver these labyrinths that is funding, let's say, issues, or whether this application that you have developed, is it going to reach to those people who need it? Do they need a phone? If they have a phone, how do they recharge it? If they recharge it, do they have the education, the skills to be able to use it? So development requires commitment multi-year, rather than 1 year funding, and I think this is where many humanitarian organizations, including ours, do struggle, because you have to sometimes make a decision. Do I need to respond to an emergency now, or do I want to invest in a plan that essentially goes hand in hand with the emergency response? When do you drop food, drop hygiene items, make sure that they're protected, and then at some stage switch
Yeah.
that you're no longer in an emergency mode, and then you are into more of there are lots of women, there's lots of girls.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can discuss I don't know, sexual reproductive health, or also super important to involve men, because one of the most interesting thing that I have heard recently was that the men that I have spoken to recently, they're the ones who are telling us our women are experiencing PTSD.
Right.
These are pregnant women. When they give birth, they experience PTSD. So I think, or they have because of the protracted nature of the war. But how do you address that as a do we partner, or do we essentially do it ourselves? And these are lots of questions.
Yes,
Yeah.
and maybe it's a chain of strategy. I'm sorry, Sarah, I've got to cut you off 1 second because we're going to run out of time, and I really do want to bring in Sally. Sally Dimashki is...
One thing I have to say, please. This is where some of the tension you can see, though, comes from. Because as Dorka actually said, that ICRC in its top 10 countries has been there for decades, and in some of them for 30 years. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Millennium Development Goals, work in, 15-year chunks? So these emergencies have been going on, again, longer than a woman's reproductive life cycle, longer than these enormous development programs. And so at some stage, this is why the whole system needs to be rethought, because how long do you bus water in for, or should you start investing in electrical grids and so on? But so I mean, it's all deeply complex.
We could be here for 3 days, guys. Do you want to be really brief? Because I do want to turn to Sally.
I'll just be really brief on that,
Okay.
because there are solutions that are starting to come, and particularly in
Right.
South Sudan, which are I guess trying to address some of these issues. And the project that Tricia mentioned that I'm doing some pro bono work on with the World Bank, which is a convening mechanism to try to bring in multi-year funding, not only multi-year funding, but also bringing funding upstream, preventative. Prevention is the word, investment is the word. So investing in resilience, investing more money upfront, because South Sudan, and Dorsa can tell you this, has gone through, being on the brink of famine. It's almost constantly on the brink of famine. And so you can't expect people to live like this. So we need to get smarter. We need to work together. And the Famine Action Mechanism is a project with multiple organizations at the table, including ICRC right at the center, including tech companies, including philanthropists like myself and companies, trying to find a smarter way to make this aid go further and to try to use, smarter techniques to invest in these women and girls and men, so we don't constantly live in the state of precariousness.
No, absolutely. That might be your call for action as well. I'm not sure what that was included in there. So, Sally, we want you here. You're part of the G20, the Girls 20 delegation here. And Sally, if you don't mind standing up so we can see you. She is project coordinator of Refugee 613. And this is working on refugee integration in Ottawa, Canada. So although it's not as neat as saying this is full circle, we've talked about really the real priorities that the internally displaced need. There are refugees. But then some of them make it to a sort of mature Western economy. So if you want to talk a little bit about what happens there and how young refugee women are dealing and coping with this.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your work and experiences. I could sit here for hours and listen to you. Just being mindful of time, I just wanted to give one example of something where I've seen a lot that we've been doing with young women and with refugees in general, but I think for women it really has an impact, and it's storytelling workshops. And this really has an impact in two ways. So one, for many, it's the first time you sit down and really think about your story and what it means to you. And what that does is that while you're writing your story, you're making sense of it. You're dealing with it. And of course, there's many services there's access to mental health, and there's many counseling services that are there to also support. But that's the way to deal with that. And what it does is that it also empowers young women. What I've seen is once they do it twice, they want to do it again because they're enjoying it, and it becomes something that's part of their life. Also, unfortunately, being a refugee in many conversations comes with shame, and being able to make sense of the story and to formulate your own story empowers you, and you feel like you own your story, you own your narrative. The second thing it does is that what we've done with that is then we're able to bring them to schools, to different events, to share with people the story of young women and of refugees and what it means to them to have gone through the experience. So it educates the public, it educates people, it puts them out there. It also breaks stereotypes because people have a lot of misconceptions about what it's like to be a refugee and who are refugees. If refugees are anyone can become a refugee in one day or another. So I think it's really helpful in that way. And the last thing I just wanted to say, because I think it relates to many people here, is the importance of representation. I think we still lack those stories, whether it's on social media, in brands, in conversations, in the workplace. And so I think when you're thinking about your work, how can you make sure that those voices and those stories can be shared, and how can you make sure that they're represented when you're making decisions, especially if you're making decisions that impacts young refugee women and refugees in general?
I'm so sorry, we're kind of running out of time. Does anyone have a desperate question that they want to? Yes, please, the lady back there. I'm really sorry, we're running over time. Story of my life.
Hello, everybody. I'm Naima. I'm from Morocco, and I was UNHCR staff member, and now I'm doing courses on training for peace, security, women, peace and security, especially in Africa and Arab world. And what is in the field, women have a deep and positive impact on peace and security. But unfortunately, in the field, if we do hard work, when it comes to peace process, only maybe 10% in peace negotiation women are present. And even in the United Nations, how many women are leading peacekeeping missions? And even me, when I was UNHCR staff member, as humanitarian, because we are women, we are targeted in the country when we are working because we are United Nations, but as well by men working with us. Everybody maybe heard here about the scandal in South Africa by UN peacekeeping who abused of refugee women.
Can you? I'm so sorry. Can you ask a question?
No, it's just comments.
Oh, okay. Well, I fully. We all are on board. We understand. We're there. Dorsa, do you know, direct yourself to that kind of situation? Okay. Any other question? A brief question? Yes, lady. Hey, you.
Hi, Suzanne Beagle. I wanted to know if there's any role for investment to play in this picture.
Good question.
I'll take that one. Yes. So for some of you may have known that ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, did their first humanitarian impact bond. A lot of people say, in fact, Tricia and I will be on a panel next week at Chatham House talking about this. You know, it's difficult to invest in conflict. It's not impossible. So the first humanitarian impact bond is in a health setting. It's in physical rehabilitation in 3 physical rehabilitation centers in Africa. These are being the bond is actually funded. These are being built. The staff are being trained. And again, this is an investment. These are life-changing facilities that are going into place that will not only help the people with the it could be landmine wounds, it could be other things that they're being treated for, but also will impact the people who are caring for them, and this lifts everybody up. And so this goes back to what Dorsa was saying about, you know, she does have mobile surgical teams. We can invest in some of these places where we need to upfront this longer-term money so that ICRC can plan for these. And that is the critical thing about the impact bond, is the ability to plan and put in this 5-year term funding to allow this to happen. And there is a place for that.
And that definitely is a call for action. Do any of you want to address a call for action?
I've got it.
Okay, go Rosie.
So, we launched Unfiltered last month on the App Store, and I have got a lot of help I would like to ask for. So firstly, if you represent an NGO, especially an NGO which works with the refugee community, please pledge your support, because we need your backing to get sexual health at the top of the refugee agenda. And then if you represent a company, you can also support us through product donations or through partnership. And if you're an individual, we need you to push your governments to put sexual health again at the top of the agenda, because the more people who are talking about it, the more action that we will get. And finally, if you're a refugee, we really want to hear your feedback. So please download the app. It's called Unfiltered, and tell us what you think, because we want to improve and we're here to listen.
And I think on that note, I think really the most important thing for people who maybe know this, maybe don't know this, is that women are not born victims. They are superhuman strong. No investment is wasted on any woman who's in these dire situations, not one. It does not go to waste. And please remember that when you think about this and you talk amongst yourselves, and perhaps even change the way you behave and invest as well. Thank you very much. Please give everyone a great applause, great hand of applause.